Hello and welcome to today's CMG webinar. If you are not familiar with our organization, the Computer Measurement Group is a not-for-profit worldwide organization of IT professionals committed to digital transformation initiatives and best practices, including the measurement and management of computer systems and networks from a performance and capacity perspective to drive ongoing change. We offer in-person and online events like this one, which you can find on our events calendar at cmg.org/calendar. And here's a list of a few other upcoming webinars we have. You can find those on our website. And we are also excited to announce Impact 2020 in fabulous Las Vegas. Impact is CMG's flagship event, and this year is our 45th annual conference. Keynote speakers are being announced now, and we are thrilled to have Ed Hunter, who leads the Performance and Operating Systems Group for the streaming service at Netflix. This is our second year with a Netflix professional, and they offer a really great session. Impact 2020 will also feature tech demos, networking opportunities, and a chance to meet with solutions providers. Visit cmgimpact.com for more info on our speakers and early bird pricing specials. So I want to thank you again for joining us today for this webinar. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you know that you can submit questions through the GoToWebinar panel. We will be collecting those throughout the session, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So now I will turn you over to Colin.
Thank you, Whitney. Let me just share my screen with everybody. All right, Whitney, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for your time today, for taking time out to view our webinar today. Let me just get into. So my name is Colin van der Ross. I'm the software engineer here at SDS for the past 11 years. I've been in the industry for almost, well, over 30 years. So I'm probably dating myself. And I've worked for a large bank as a systems programmer. My skills are primarily on the ZOS security, performance, automation, and networking space on ZOS. So a quick update for the folks on the webinar today that's not familiar with SDS or Software Diversified Services. We've been around for 36 years, and some of you may recognize the Vital Signs suite of products that has been around for a very long time. I'm sure Vital Signs for VTAM might be one that sticks out. We have over 20 ZOS, ZVSE, and also ZVM products. And one thing that stands out from an SDS point of view, we've been recognized a few times for our world-class support. We also have a few partner solutions that may be of interest to the folks on the call today. I think one that stands out is the IronSphere offering, which makes the management and implementations of STIGs so much easier. Today, though, we'll be talking about different options to secure your FTP on ZOS, and I'll also be touching a little bit on the SSH Tech Tier product, which is part of the SDS portfolio. So here's the agenda. I'm going to cover quite a lot of detail pretty fast. My intent is to give you a good overview of the different options available to you for securing your FTP transmissions on ZOS. Firstly, I'll be talking about good old FTP and also provide you a live packet trace on some of the vulnerabilities that is inherent in FTP. So if you ran a packet trace on an FTP control session, you'd be able to see the password. We'll also talk about FTPS and then talk a little bit about FTP over SSH tunnel. SFTP seems to be the major drive today. In conversations with a lot of our customers, they've been told that they have to stop using FTP and move to SFTP. We'll talk about some of the pros and cons of SFTP. Then also plan to show you a bit of a hybrid solution. So FTP to FTP, if your manager has come to you and told you, hey, we need to stop using FTP, and perhaps you don't have the resources or the manpower to go through a an exercise where you have to change JCL from FTP command syntax to SFTP command syntax, then perhaps the solution may be of interest to you. Talk very briefly about VPNs. That could also be a solution for you to consider. And then lastly, talk about PGP and also a brief live demo. So, okay, you don't have to get your head around this picture completely, but this is a high-level overview of what I intend to cover today. As I mentioned, we'll be covering a lot of material quickly. What I hope to do is give you a flavor of some of the options available to you. Odds are that you might find a need for more than one solution depending on your specific needs of your multiple partners. So my plan is to give it a quick broad brush to make you aware of some of the ways to get it done. FTP is a well-known common application for moving data. I actually looked back a while ago, and the RFC dates back to the late 60s, early 70s, so it's been around for a very long time. But it has a lot of technical baggage that makes it less than ideal for transferring data that is proprietary, confidential, or not really intended to be available to everyone in the world. The world as it existed when FTP was originally designed was a much smaller, safer world than it is today. Unfortunately, though, that isn't the case any longer. It seems every day you read in the news media about customers that have been breached. And with the advent and proliferation of the worldwide internet, the playing field has gotten much larger. And it's also provided us with a great wealth of opportunities. Unfortunately, few opportunities come without some cost, and privacy is normally one of the first casualties of accessibility. That is, though, if you, unless you are willing to make the necessary adjustments to protect your data. So let's talk about some of the methods and tools commonly available to resolve the privacy problem. Each of these methods we'll be reviewing has its own set of benefits, but also has its own set of complications and limitations. So after a brief description of the concept, we'll have a look at the pros and cons of each solution. One of the things I like to do whenever I'm testing and researching is always to try and find a practical example when this particular method might be used. So I plan to introduce some scenarios where you can best leverage the benefits of each of these solutions. Firstly, we'll talk about good old FTP and when that still fits the bill. Next, we'll move on to leveraging what you're probably familiar with and already have in place by exploring the FTP-S protocol and how it might be used in the right environment. Then we'll continue by discussing some other technologies that might make sense when you need to share data with your business partners or people that are using a different platform. This is taking advantage of FTP over an SSH encrypted tunnel. So this is a bit of a hybrid, providing a bridge between what's already in place and the encryption features of the SSH protocol. Then we'll leave FTP behind for a moment and start talking about using SFTP or Secure FTP protocol, which is an integrated part of the SSH environment. So you've been investing in FTP for a number of years. I'm guessing it's scattered throughout your batch jobs. But as I mentioned previously, your auditors come to you and say, hey, you need to stop using FTP and now move to SFTP. Now what? Well, we'll revisit FTP and how you might be able to marry your investment to the new requirement with limited effort and without all of the hassles of conversion and without having to build all the bridges yourself. There are also some technologies that are not really specifically file transfer oriented, but might already be in place that provide the necessary security between you and your trusted partners. And we'll discuss VPNs or virtual private networks very briefly. Then data in motion might not be your only concern. Other options do exist outside of encrypting data in transit. In particular, we'll be talking about protecting data before transmission and when the type of solution would be best implemented. Okay, time to simplify. Let's kick it off with looking at regular FTP. So one of the biggest advantages to FTP is that it's already available in so many places. ZOS, Windows, Unix, Linux, you name it, it usually comes with the FTP ready to go. The client side is nearly always ready to go out of the box, and the server side is usually pre-installed, just waiting for some configuration information, and you'll be up and running. In addition, since it's been the de facto standard for so long, and no one wants to be left out, it usually comes with the appropriate extensions to make it work well on the platform that it's delivered with. For example, the ZOS FTP server and client handles MVS datasets without skipping a beat. Also, the EBCDIC to ASCII conversion is ready to go. In fact, even JS support is available for the submission of the jobs and extraction of reports. What are the cons? We know FTP doesn't handle privacy and security very well. FTP is a clear text protocol, and any eavesdropper on the line can see user IDs, passwords, and the data files themselves. So in a closed, secure environment, that can save a lot of hassles, but that type of inherent guarantee is more the exception than the rule in today's networking environments. So to address these issues, there have already been a lot of network precautions taken, such as firewalls. Firewalls are intended to let safe traffic pass while blocking suspect connections. It is a good plan, but difficult to implement, particularly when it comes to FTP. FTP is a strange protocol because it was designed around having two connections, one for commands, which is the initial pathway, and a second for data when transfers are underway. This diagram gives you a basic idea of what a standard active FTP session might look like. The client requests a connection to the server, so that's called the command session, and you'll see this when I do the live packet trace. That's where I intend to run the packet trace in a few minutes' time. And then the server opens a data connection as necessary to transfer data between the partners. The FTP protocol was designed around a trusting relationship. Both participants in the communication were oblivious to the rest of the world, but as the world got to be a more open, less safe place, precautions were put in place. A conventional approach was to place a firewall between the intranet and the rest of the world. So those on the inside, typically called the intranet, were trusted, and so were given permission to talk to whoever they liked. But those on the outside were not permitted to start the conversation with someone on the inside. That caused a problem for an active firewall session. So what happened was, when the initial command connection worked, the initial command connection would work fine, but when a transfer started up, the firewall would block the new connection coming in from the outside. So what did they do? A passive mode was added to help deal with the security problem. In passive mode, the client would indicate its intention to the server. If the FTP server was configured to support passive mode, the server would start a listener on an ephemeral port, so that is a dynamic port grabbed from a pool of available ports, and then pass that port number to the client on the command connection. The client could then initiate the second data connection, and the firewall would allow the transfer to work. So basic firewall setup now worked, but sometimes this basic setup was not as secure as might be desirable. Limiting access to the outside world can be desirable for businesses in many cases, but this could cause a problem for the second connection on that ephemeral port, which was not defined as an acceptable port to the firewall. So firewalls were enhanced to sniff the port number being passed from the command connection to provide temporary access from that host to get that data connection working. Okay, so another band-aid was added to fix that problem. But this will become a problem in a moment when we start talking about FTPS. Before we get into FTPS, let's wrap up some of the other shortcomings of native FTP. FTP did not make any concessions for improved network performance. Compression was native to the FTP protocol, and there is a Mode Z extension that is available in some implementations, but you cannot count on it being available. FTP also did not provide any application level checksum to verify the integrity of the data. It relied on the TCP checksum, for which provided some minimal checking, but that could be easily fooled. For example, a transposition of the bytes in a packet could provide an identical checksum fooling the integrity check. I think network reliability has come a long way, but it is still not flawless. If you need to know that the data was transmitted accurately, FTP does not provide the level of confidence that you might desire. So what I would like to do now is to illustrate to you I would like to run a real-time packet trace on one of my FTP servers. So I'm just using one of the SDS products, and I'm going to fire off a real-time packet trace on this FTP server because that's where I'm going to initiate a session to. And let's run a packet trace to show you some of the vulnerabilities on FTP. All right, I'm going to hit the start button. This is going to capture all of the packets to and fro from my laptop to the mainframe. So I've already got a client that I've set up, and I'm going to log on to it on that mainframe with a user ID called bcom1, and there you can see the IP address, and I'm using regular FTP. So let's hit the connect button, and there you can see I've logged in. Looks like there's some issues with some of the paths on this particular user ID, but I'm not really interested in that. And let's go back to our packet trace, and there you can see I've already got some packets that came in from the real-time packet trace that I'm doing. Let's go and examine some of them, and I'd like to point out some of the important information for you. So let's go down further. As you can see, I'm just scrolling through the packets, and that's the first one I'd like to highlight to you is, if I just highlight the data, you'll be able to see there's the user ID. Remember, bcom1 was the TSO or the FTP user ID that I used to log on to the mainframe. The second one was prompted for a password. So there you can see send password, please. And the very next packet, there you can see the password of the FTP user ID that I used to log on to the mainframe. So certainly not something that you want to be using, especially if it's a user ID that has access to, very generous access to mainframes. So something that you need to be aware of. Okay, let's get back to our presentation. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the common uses of when FTP could be used. I think FTP can still be useful when the privacy and integrity are less important than easy access. For example, if the data is public knowledge and there is some room for inaccuracy, then FTP might make good sense. Since FTP is familiar, and everybody, I'm sure, on this webinar today has used FTP and already available in most cases, it can be used effectively. You might want to consider its usage whenever I call an anonymous test would be deemed appropriate. First of all, anonymous access would indicate little need for confidentiality and a limited need for accuracy. Second, anonymous also means authentication is not important. Keep in mind that the native FTP means only the data, but also user IDs and passwords are being sent in the clear. So anyone sniffing the traffic might be able to get to access the information that you consider confidential. You may also want to use it on the intranet, so that's on your internal network because it's already available and well known. But keep in mind that user IDs and passwords are easily sniffed, and there are also tools freely available on the internet to perform these kinds of packet traces. Also, a quick internet search for data theft by employees might be an eye-opener for you. Statistics as high as 80% for data theft being perpetrated by employees can easily be found. Intranet or internet, I still consider using the anonymous test we just talked about. So in the end, far too many things are being done via FTP, and a review of what is really going on is often the very best place to start. So let's move on to a twist of FTP. And let's talk about FTP over SSL. FTP over SSL is very similar to native FTP. The syntax is the same, the protocol is the same, and with a bit of configuration, encryption can be added to what we know and love. In the serious arena, FTPS is already available as part of the base FTP offering. They both provide some nice ZOS-specific features such as MVS dataset support, JS support, and also SMF reporting on some key events. FTPS also accommodates for X.509 certificates and Kerberos. So services from outside parties such as VeriSign, Equifax, and several other vendors can do verification work to make sure that the person is who they say they are. And since the server and the client are designed to work with ZOS, use of RACF keyrings is available for management of certificates. So that sounds all great. It has a lot of features that you might be looking for, but what's the downside? Well, remember I mentioned earlier we were discussing FTP and firewalls, that encryption adds a bit of a problem to the workaround of passive FTP. Remember how the server passed the port to connect back to the server on the command connection and how the firewall might sniff that to provide temporary dynamic access for the client? Well, now the data on the command connection is encrypted, so the firewall cannot sniff it any longer. Even though there are FTP servers and clients available on most platforms, they're not likely to be configured and active everywhere, so don't assume it's available on the other end. When does it make good sense to make use of FTPS? FTP over SSL is a great candidate for transfers between LPARs. I think in a sysplex environment, usually there isn't any firewalls between them, and by using FTPS, you can protect yourself from sniffers. The I-series also is commonly loaded with an FTPS server and clients, so that is another good possibility. And it is not uncommon for the Z-series and I-series systems to live close together, so firewalls might not be in play. Other platforms might have the functionality available, but the further apart the partners are, the more likely there will be a firewall that will need to be configured to allow the multi-connection traffic. Let's move along. Let's talk about FTPS over a SSH tunnel. Okay, so now we'll talk about a different encryption mechanism other than SSL, and SSH is a similar technology that can also provide the confidentiality, authentication, and integrity as for in encryption. And also the FTP you already have in place, you can take an easy advantage of the encryption tunnel. It's also much more firewall friendly. A SSH tunnel only requires a single connection, usually on port 22. The connection can actually carry multiple tunnels simultaneously and deals with the multiplexing, getting the right data from each tunnel to the right application. So what happens in the command connection and the data connection is multiplexed in the same SSH encrypted connection. No more secondary connections coming from the wrong side of the firewall. SSH also compresses the data as it encrypts it, so you have the benefit of reduced bandwidth. Of course, the security and savings of bandwidth comes at a cost of CPU, but if your company has the crypto processor, you might be able to offload it to that. Some technologies also will take advantage of the ZIPs and also IFL processors too. SSH also has a more sophisticated checksum process that is less likely to be fooled. So you have the confidence and the network won't corrupt the data without you knowing about it. It's another good solution if everything is in place, but this is usually requires some coordination between the partners to make sure that all is there. For example, both FTP and SSH are required on both ends. FTP clients are usually there, but some servers may not be. And Linux and Unix administrators have come to rely on SSH and its SFTP subsystem to move files around. They regularly have an FTP server running. First, there might not have never been a need or requirement for it. And second, FTP would require another port to be opened up. So that opens up another potential exposure to the intruder. This can be a good solution though if all of the pieces are in place and you can leverage that which is already implemented in your environment with little to no modification of the batch jobs. Okay, let's talk a little bit about secure FTP or SFTP. In some cases, you'll find resistance to loading a backend FTP server on the partner's platform. So you might need to implement a vanilla SFTP transfer. First, SFTP as well as FTPS and FTP via an SSH tunnel provide encryption from the client to the server end to end, and this is not unique to the solution. Before we go on, I'd like to clarify a bit about SFTP. SFTP is not the encryption engine. It's a subsystem of the SSH server. It's the SSH component that is responsible for the encryption. SSH can encrypt lots of different kinds of traffic, including telnet, file transfers, and just about any other kind of TCP traffic you want to. SFTP simply is the add-on that makes file transfers more convenient to run through the SSH tunnel. So since SFTP is using SSH and SSH is already providing the compression and integrity checking inherent in the encryption, SFTP is able to take full advantage of both. One of the biggest advantages of SFTP is that it is semi-ubiquitous. I say semi-ubiquitous because it's almost always available on Unix and Linux platforms, but not so much on ZOS and Windows. In fact, recently I just noticed on my Windows laptop, Windows 10, I see they now do come with SSH client installed. You generally have to install something on these platforms, as I mentioned, to add the support. If you're running the older version of Windows, you're probably going to have to install something there. There are free solutions and also for a fee solutions, and the free solutions will get you there part of the way, but there are usually some significant limitations involved. Base SFTP does not provide EBCDIC to ASCII translation. Some of the SSH offerings available for ZOS have extensions to add this type of support, however. In addition, access to MVS datasets, the JSQ, and other ZOS-specific features are usually desirable. Also, the ability to offload to the crypto processor is another feature that can be important. Fortunately, these are available for a fee solution, so if you want to, you will have to review what your needs are before deciding on the right solution for your environment. The demo I'll be providing in a few minutes' time is using the SSH Tunnel-Pos product, which provides the access to MVS datasets, ASCII to EBCDIC support, and also the X.509 certificate support that are some of the features that is supported on SSH Tunnel-Pos. So what else do you need to be aware of? Well, the SFTP command syntax is similar, but not the same as FTP. So there might be a little bit of re-education required for your users. All of the solutions we discussed thus far are only designed to protect your data while in transit between sites, but once it reaches the other end, the data might be a free-for-all. Later, I'll be discussing some options if you are looking for more protection beyond transmission. So common uses, if you're interested in disseminating data to your Linux farm or your partners are using Linux or Unix, then this might be a great option for you. As I mentioned earlier, we hear this from our customers. They've been told to stop using FTP and start using SFTP, and that's about the only direction they've been given. If the real goal is encryption, then any of the previous solutions I spoke about should suffice, other than plain FTP, that is. If the goal truly is to implement SFTP, then this solution might be necessary. However, there may be another solution that will help make the conversion from FTP to SFTP a little bit less painless. So this is a FTP to SFTP. This is a vendor solution using VFTP and SSH Tunnel-Pos. So the Tunnel-Pos SSH solution provides a little bit of a trick to build that bridge to ease the FTP to SFTP conversion, and that involves FTP to a SFTP proxy. The FTP commands get routed to the proxy, and they are converted from FTP commands to SFTP commands, allowing you to communicate with your partner's SSH SFTP server natively. The network portion is really SFTP, but your client jobs are really still using FTP. You just need to configure the FTP job steps to use the proxy, and this can be done with a simple JCL modification. There are even tools that can ease the JCL changes for you, and I plan to provide you with a brief demo of this in a few minutes' time. Just a reminder though that FTP and SFTP are not 100% compatible, so not everything can be handled automatically, but basic FTP functions generally make the transition pretty easy. So if you have a major or you have a big investment in FTP and a conversion to native SFTP will be a major undertaking, then perhaps this might be the best solution for you. So I'd like to provide you with a brief demo on this solution. I'm sure everybody is familiar with FTP command syntax, and this is a really basic FTP job that I've got set up. I've just omitted the IP address and user ID and password, and there you can see just doing a change directory to one of my directories. It's a binary transfer and doing a regular put of a file. So nothing that you haven't seen before. However, if you had to undertake and convert that same FTP JCL to SFTP, it would look something similar to what I have on my screen at the moment. I'm using the SSH Tech Tier product to perform this, and you can see I'm invoking a program. I've chosen to use password authentication. There are different modes of authentication that can be enforced on the product. Here I'm using something called the FT advice string, and I'm doing some conversion. So also the carriage line feed delimiters, I'm controlling that. And I'm basically doing a put of an MBS file. That's the user ID. This is the IP address, and I'm storing it in the upload directory called hexdump.txt. So as you can see, some significant changes if you were to convert that batch FTP to SFTP. However, if you do have SSH Tech Tier installed, and as I mentioned, the proxy, what you could do is make that migration a little bit easier. So I've logged on to VFTP, which provides you with total visibility of all of your FTP transfers from a ZOS point of view. I've run the protection mechanism query, and now you can see some of the queries here for the last 7 days on the SDS LPAs, and it looks like we have some using FTP to SFTP, and we also have a lot of them running unsecured and some using SSH. So bear in mind there is some work required, but suffice to say that the VFTP, we replaced the standard IBM FTP client with our VFTP client. And let me show you how this can be achieved where you do not have to make any JCL changes. So I've opened up the FTP client configuration, and these are different rules that can be enforced on VFTP. I'm going to use a rule called FTP-SFTP3, and it's only enforced on an agent on one of my LPOS called SDS1, and also the job name is only going to apply to a filter called ZFTP job star. So it could be job 1, job A, whatever matches this filter. There are some additional operands that's required in your FTP.data, one being the SOCKS configuration file and the other being the firewall friendly operand. And I'm saying sessions for this job step should run across a SOCKS proxy. So my plan is now to go run a batch job called ZFTP job, and to show you that it's regular FTP command syntax, and I did not have to make any JCL changes to it. So there's the batch job. There you can see the name of the batch job, and I'm going to submit that, and we can go and have a look at the contents of the batch job. Let me split my screen and go and have a look at the output. There, the job has ended, and just set the prefix correctly. And let's examine some of the information inside here. So bear in mind, I did not have to make any JCL changes. That was the rule that was applied on VFTP. And there's some additional information inside of the batch job that says the proxy intercepted this FTP, and all of those commands were now converted from FTP to SFTP. So this certainly is a good solution for you to consider if you have heavily invested in FTP and you don't have the manpower to convert those FTP batch jobs to SFTP. That's certainly something for you to consider. Okay, let's get back to the remainder of the demo. Let's talk briefly about VPNs. VPNs might already be in place at your site to allow you to get your data transferred from one site to another safely. If it's already there and it's satisfying the need, you probably won't be listening to this part of the webinar. I simply wanted to mention it to you because it might also play a part in your overall strategy. VPNs are commonly set up between two networks to encrypt all of the data between them, and they are commonly used between the network and a host, perhaps from a home office environment. I work from a home office here in Atlanta, connected to the mainframes up in Minnesota, so that works perfectly for me. The VPNs provide lots of flexibility in what you can get access to, but easy access also means either more administration or less control. But it can be a great solution for the right problem. Since VPNs encrypt data, integrity is usually a good side effect. Also, some VPN software can provide some level of compression. It's not always there, however, since VPNs are implemented at a lower level of the IP stack and applications don't really need to make any special accommodations for the encryption. Unfortunately, VPNs are not usually a good choice for the ad hoc connections. If you need to make occasional secure connections to some of your partners, then one of the other technologies might be a better fit for you. In addition, when the VPN is implemented at the firewall, that's where the encryption ends. Traffic over the intranet is unprotected, and as I discussed that concern earlier, I'm not sure if, lastly, from the last topic, they're usually managed by another group. I'm not sure if that's a pro or con, but VPNs are generally managed by the network group, so it might be something that's outside of your control. I suppose it kind of depends on your point of view as to whether that's a good or a bad thing. When is a good time to make use of VPNs? I think since VPNs are not easily set up on the fly, so they're usually limited to persistent partnerships. So that could be maybe for customers that you have these persistent connections, that could be a good candidate for this type of connection. Okay, this is the last solution I'd like to discover, pretty good privacy, and also provide you with a very brief demo, and then we're going to take some of the questions that hopefully you guys are putting in the chat box. Pretty good privacy, I'm sure everybody is familiar with PGP. It's different than everything else we discussed today, and it can be a really good option, particularly when the data involved is of a highly confidential nature. So if you pre-encrypt the data, it'll be protected in transit, but also be protected at the destination. And only those with the proper credentials will be able to extract the data. So since encryption is already handled at any transport mechanism will do, as a matter of fact, maybe good old FTP might be a good choice. If you go through that route, though, remember that the authentication of the FTP control session would be in plain text again. So remember, that's the packet trace that I showed you earlier when I ran that on the control session. But since the data is already encrypted and can be protected by access at the other end by requiring the proper credentials after transit, an anonymous FTP session can be used to safely transfer the data and still protect it from prying eyes anywhere along its path. PGP also provides the compression and integrity that can be so important, particularly in those really large files. But the other thing you might consider is that PGP isn't just for network transfers. It can be used even for data that doesn't move at all. So any data at rest, data on your disk, as data becomes available after a batch run, perhaps it's on a volume somewhere or in a PDS somewhere, you can encrypt that data. So certainly something to consider. I think once also you've introduced it into your batch processes, obviously if you're going to introduce this, there is some staging required. You'd have to probably code something in your batch job to execute the PGP procedure to encrypt the data. But once it's introduced into your batch jobs and processes, that step can be as transparent as anything else. So as I mentioned, this can be a really good solution when you're concerned about more than just prying eyes on the internet. PGP can be useful for encryption even when the network transfers aren't involved. But in some cases, the network is involved, but controlling the network is outside of your domain. Firewalls admins can sometimes be a little finicky about allowing traffic they're not comfortable with, or they might have other tasks that are of higher priority, at least in their eyes. I would like to give you a brief demo on PGP. So let me just get to that screen. And this is one of my other emulators I got going here. So this is just a sample batch job. Let's assume that the data is now ready and you now want to encrypt the information. This is what a PGP on the mainframe would look like. I'm invoking one of our products, the eBusiness server, and what I'd like to show you is in line number 13, I'm doing encrypt. So I'd like to show you this. This is just a text that I'm planning. In fact, I'm in it already. There you can see the name of the data set. And as it's just regular text, once I run the batch job and I execute it, that particular text will be converted to something called ciphertext. And if I'm going to have a look at that, you'll be able to see that it's not readable and nobody can really decipher this information. There you can see it is ciphertext, so that's certainly something to consider. We've had a few customers, in fact, this is really a hot topic, but we've had a few customers that have gone down this route and have chosen to implement SFTP and using PGP encryption as well. I suppose it all depends on what your requirements is. Let me get back to the slideshow. I think I'm about to wrap it up. So since PGP can be used over any transport, you can certainly take control back of your data. Okay, so hopefully this mess isn't as confusing anymore. I think I've discussed a lot of possibilities, and the reality is that it's not likely that any one of these solutions will solve all of your needs. You're probably going to come up with a mixture of different solutions. I think finding the right technical partners to help identify the problem and what solutions fits your specific puzzle best can save you lots of time and your company lots of money. SDS is certainly here to help you to get a grip on those different options discussed here today, and we can provide you with the expertise and tools to help you get the job done. So thank you for your time today, and I will take some of the questions that may have come in. So Whitney, I'm going to hand it back to you for any questions that may have come in today.
Thank you, Colin. Let me just look here. Let me go through the question section. We just have some feedback. I think you must have covered everything pretty well. Does anyone else have any questions?
Hopefully I didn't confuse everybody, Whitney.
No, I don't think you covered it very well, and that's why there's no questions. Give me just a minute here. I'm trying to, oh, okay, here. I had to open up the question section. Sorry about that. Okay. What type of authentication methods can be implemented on SSH?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm guessing this maybe stems back to the example where I showed on my batch job where I was using password authentication. In fact, when you run that particular method of authentication, the batch job will actually kick out concerns saying that password authentication is not the most secure way of transferring data. So there are other ways. What I find most customers when I'm working with them, they opt for using public key authentication. That seems to be the way that most customers go. So you would upload the public key of the remote client. There is also certificate authentication, so the X.509 certificate authentication I spoke about. But I think it all depends on the customer's requirements. But those are some of the different methods of authentication that is in the product.
Thank you. We just had another question come in from Alan. Is PGP an add-on product with different platform implementations, and how do I find out more about it?
Great question. So the PG product that I spoke about, that is a product that runs on ZOS, but it does adhere to the RFC. So typically, even if you're sending information that is encrypted to a product like GPG, which is the free software on Windows, that can be sent because they do adhere to the RFC. So getting back to the question, it is an add-on. It's something that SDS can provide, so customer can certainly reach out to us. But we have it's been around for a very long time. It works really well, and you can exchange information with, I would say, Linux, Unix, you name it. Typically on most custom environments, we're able to exchange data with those, and it does adhere to the PKI infrastructure.
Great, thank you. And I actually have a notification here that there are some hands raised. I don't have any way of giving the audience audio, so if you have a question, just go ahead and type it in the questions panel and call in and I can see those. All right, so another one we had come in is, what SFTP clients does SSH support?
I suppose this stems off on the question from eBusiness Server. So yes, we have typically customers that have implemented our solution. Some people use Bitfires. I've even gone as far as using the PuTTY client, which everybody's familiar. I would say the short answer to that question is, as long as whatever software you're using on the distributed side does adhere to the SSH RFC, there should be no problems at all. Remember, I did mention earlier, the older versions of Windows typically do not come with a client or server installed, and that's something that customers typically would have to follow up with their Windows administrator. But yeah, for the most part, we work with all of those SSH server and clients out there.
We have another one on SSH, became a hot topic. So can SSH be configured to use a different port number other than port 22?
Yes, that can be changed to any port number that the customer wants. This is something that can be set up on the in the SSH configuration file.
And does the proxy run as a started task, and how do you configure it?
Wow, there's a lot of SSH questions today. So yes, the proxy is a starter task. That's the portion that if you want to use that seamless migration from FTP to SFTP, then the proxy needs to be configured, and it does run as a starter task. It does have a configuration file, so it's an XML file where you define what action the proxy should take. You can either have the proxy convert the commands to SFTP or use a SSH tunnel to send information across.
Okay. Is VFTP a prerequisite for the hybrid solution that you talked about?
So that's a good question. VFTP, as I mentioned, certainly does help customers to migrate from FTP to SFTP because we use one of our clients that wraps around the standard IBM FTP client. As I showed in the illustration or the demo where you can set up the batch jobs, it makes for migration a lot easier. If, however, a customer decides that they don't want that visibility, you can certainly set it up on the proxy where you would have to define the IP addresses that you want to send data to. It certainly requires a lot more administration, and it's not as seamless as easy on VFTP. So I would say it depends on your requirements. It's certainly not a requirement, but it does make the transition or the migration a lot easier.
We still have 2 hands raised, so I want to give anyone else an option to submit any more questions. But while we wait for that, Colin, can you tell everyone how to get a hold of you or how to find out more information about the product? If you guys are going to be sending any follow-up emails, is there any other info that you have?
Yes, I believe Jed is on the call. I don't want to put Jed on the spot, but you can certainly come to our website, sdsusa.com. We have really good information on the products there. There will be some follow-up emails with everybody that did attend today's webinar. And if there's any other questions, certainly just either you can direct them to Whitney or myself, or even just pop them on our Q&A site on the SDS USA. So let me repeat that again, www.sdsusa.com. And there's a comprehensive breakdown of all of the products. And we also have some nice short little webisodes that people can view if they want more information on the other products.
So you covered that perfectly.
Okay, thank you, Jed.
All right, well, I think that that's everything. I think you've covered, you had a lot of questions on the SSH, so that was a good part of the webinar. And if we don't have any other questions, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, just thank you to everybody that took time to attend the webinar today. Hopefully you found a lot of value in this webinar. It seems to be a very hot topic at the moment. We really have great, strong interest from customers on this. And I'm pretty surprised because I do visit customers occasionally. And it's quite surprising to find out that FTP is still being used in custom environments. So certainly something to be considered. And hopefully I've provided you with some solutions that'll give you some food for thought and give you some direction if you have been mandated to look at getting rid of unsecured FTP. But thank you, Whitney, as well for hosting, and we appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Jen, for joining us today. And everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.